Welcome to today's webinar on the protection of education from attack, with a particular focus on the role of parliamentarians in strengthening that effort. A very big welcome from me. I'm Joseph Nhan-O'Reilly from the International Parliamentary Network for Education. And we're delighted to be collaborating with our colleagues from the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack in bringing you today's webinar. So a big welcome from both organisations and a great appreciation for you joining. Colleagues, before we begin, I did just want to indicate that we've arranged for simultaneous translation of today's event. So we have English, French and Spanish translation of English presentations. And I think throughout the meeting, we will hear from at least one speaker in Arabic. So before we go any further, I would just invite you to choose the translation channel that's most appropriate. And you can do that by going to the bottom of your Zoom screen and clicking on the little globe and choosing the language that you'd like to hear today's event in. And I would say that even if you are an English speaker and want to listen in English, to choose the English translation button, and that way you will be able to hear anything that's delivered in another language in English. So hopefully you've all been able to find that button and choose the channel of translation that you'd most prefer. So we have scheduled today's event for an hour. It's short and sharp, and we've got a lot of speakers and some terrific contributions to hear from. So I'm going to start now and allow you all to hear from the terrific panel that my colleague Oliver from the Secretariat at IPNEd has lined up. And all credit to him for bringing this event to you and for working so effectively with our colleagues from GCPEA to do so. So, colleagues, today's discussion, I think you all know, couldn't be timelier. Unfortunately, attacks on education, along with the military use of schools and universities, increased by 1/3 last year compared to 2019. As we all know, these attacks have a devastating impact on the right to education of the students and the teachers involved, and of course, a devastating impact on the lives of those people as well. I'm particularly pleased that we will hear from a young person today about the impact that attacks on education have had on his life, and which will occur a little bit later. On a more positive note, though, I know that you're all aware that one of the promising developments that has occurred in recent years that is attempting to tackle this issue is the development and operationalisation of the Safe Schools Declaration. The declaration sets out member states that have endorsed its commitment to tackling attacks, to preventing them, to mitigating their impact, and to protecting education and educational facilities from those attacks. The states that have signed the Safe Schools Declaration will meet later this month, in fact, in Nigeria at the 4th International Conference of Safe Schools. The conference provides a critical opportunity for countries to commit to protecting students, teachers, schools and universities from attack and preventing the use of those facilities by the military. And that is done through the endorsement and then the implementation of the Safe Schools Declaration. So ahead of the conference, we wanted to hear from the government of Nigeria, who is a party to the Safe Schools Declaration and is hosting the 4th International Conference of Safe Schools member states in Abuja later this month. So without any further ado, it's with great pleasure that I want to introduce our first speaker, Watamasaya Papka. She's the first secretary at the Permanent Mission of Nigeria to the United Nations in Geneva, and she is supporting preparations for the upcoming Abuja conference from there. So welcome, Ambassador, over to you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Thank you. Your Excellencies, colleagues, and dear friends. Let me start by extending my sincere appreciation to the Global Coalition for Protection of Education from Attack and the International Parliamentary Network for Education for convening this webinar on the role of parliamentarians in strengthening the protection of education from attack, preparatory to the 4th International Conference on Safe Schools Declaration taking place in Abuja, Nigeria, from 25th to 27th October, under the theme, Ensuring Safe Education for All, from Commitment to Practice. The Abuja event is the first Safe School Conference to hold in Africa, and especially in the Sahel region, one of the regions most affected and impacted by various forms of attack. The forthcoming conference presents us with the opportunity to critically review the implementation progress and to hold ourselves accountable with respect to the accelerated universal endorsement, as well as the implementation of the Safe Schools Declaration. In Nigeria, the Safe Schools Declaration framework has enabled us to systematically develop strategies and mechanisms to protect education. Drawing from the SSD guidelines, Nigeria has developed a national policy for safety, security, and violence-free schools as a response to the needs of our children and the violence that directly affects them. In addition, we have identified and put appropriate mechanisms in place to address a number of challenges that affect the well-being of learners, teachers, school users, and the school community at large. This is done to ensure the safety and security of schools. Indeed, endorsing the declaration has charted a practical pathway in safeguarding the right to education. The conference hosted by Nigeria, together with the governments of Argentina, Norway, and Spain, including the African Union Commission and the Global Coalition for Protection of Education Against Attack, will focus largely on sharing good practices on the implementation of the declaration by member states. It will, in addition, highlight the need to promote synergy among ministries of education, defense, justice, and foreign affairs, particularly in identifying prevention and response measures, while forging global cooperation and strengthening coordination. This platform represents an avenue to identify key actions required by governments to strengthen national and international legal mechanisms to effect justice and accountability for victims of attack on education. The declaration has so far received 112 endorsements from states, representing more than half of the United Nations membership. While it is obvious that notable progress has been made, the Abuja conference promises to galvanize additional support for the declaration. We therefore encourage you to share your experiences and good practices ahead of the conference. This experience sharing will come in handy at the conference, and the highlights included in GCPEA's Implementation Resource Bank to serve as a resource for implementation network. In the spirit of attaining universal endorsement of the declaration, the conference will provide opportunities for member states to announce further endorsement and commitment to safeguarding education in conflict, in line with the pledges by governments in this regard. We therefore urge governments to consider announcing their endorsements prior to or at the conference. The conference will hold in hybrid format to accommodate participants around the world in line with COVID-19 safety protocols. In Nigeria, few individuals, including invited speakers, will be allowed to attend the conference in person, while virtual login will be available to all registered participants. Delegates participating virtually are required to register online by completing the registration form, which is available on the conference website, www.ssdconference.education.gov.ng. I thank you. Thank you. I have to take my leave now. Thank you so much. And I wish you fruitful deliberations today. Thank you.
Watamasaya, thank you very much for representing the government of Nigeria, who are hosting the Safe Schools Conference later this month in Abuja. It was fantastic to hear from you. And of course, today's event is very much held in the lead up to that conference, building momentum, both for further endorsement, as you said, which is absolutely critical, but also improved implementation by states which have already endorsed the Safe Schools Declaration. It's fantastic to hear that the conference is coming to Africa and that Nigeria, which, as you said, has been challenged by attacks on education, as have other countries in the Sahel, and continues to be so. So hopefully we can use the conference to build momentum in Nigeria and beyond for safer schools and the prevention of education from attack. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So colleagues, for those of you who may have joined after I opened the event, I do want to say we are providing translation. So if you've joined and require French, Spanish or Arabic translation, go to the bottom of the screen, choose that little translation button and the language which you would like to hear today's event in. I'm really delighted now to be able to turn to a good friend and colleague in the form of Veronique Aubert. Veronique's going to provide an overview of both the issue and how the Safe Schools Declaration is making a contribution to tackling the challenge of attacks on education. Veronique is the co-chair of the co-organizers of this event, the Global Coalition for the Protection of Education from Attack. She works at Save the Children, where she's responsible for child protection in conflict. And she has also most recently been appointed a special advisor to the International Criminal Court's prosecutor, and her advice is on particularly the crimes against and affecting children. So we couldn't really hope for a better, more expert and more engaged person to provide us with the overview of the issue and how the Safe Schools Declaration is tackling it. Veronique, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Joseph, and thank you to the whole team organizing this event. I am actually really honored to participate here today amongst distinguished panelists. And as Joseph mentioned, I have the pleasure to speak both as co-chair of the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack, as well as from my perspective as Children Armed Conflict lead for Save the Children UK. I'm just going to clarify that GCPEA, the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack, is actually a unique interagency coalition that was formed in 2010 and is co-chaired by Save the Children and Human Rights Watch. And the purpose is to address the problem of targeted attacks on education during armed conflict. Well, these attacks include the bombing, the burning of schools and universities, the killing, the maiming, the raping, the adoption, the arbitrary arrest, the recruitment of students and educators, and all this happening at or on the way to and back from school. And these are perpetrated by armed forces, but also by other state actors or armed groups during armed conflict or insecurity. I really welcome this collaboration between GCPEA and IPNEd. Parliamentarians have a very important role to play, as highlighted in the recent IPNEd briefing paper. It sets out a range of parliamentary mechanisms to ensure education is better protected from attack, including through encouraging the endorsement and the implementation of the Safe School Declaration. We really look forward to hearing more about concrete actions already taken by your members later on the program. Support for the Safe School Declaration by parliamentarians have been carried out, for example, throughout the Doha Declaration, as well as by the European Parliament, urging its member states to protect education from attack. And this debate is very important to continue and strengthen advances in ensuring safe education in conflict. So you will ask me, but what is the scope of these attacks? Well, education is extremely vulnerable in situations of armed conflict, and one particularly damaging effect is a proliferation of attack on education. In nearly every conflict around the world, students, teachers, school, and university become the target of attacks. Parents fear sending their children to school in case the school becomes a target. Other risks associated with conflict, such as child recruitment, sexual violence, all have long-term consequences for children and their future, and ultimately disturb any chance of getting an education. In nearly every conflict-affected country, girls are particularly vulnerable due to the higher incidence of sexual and gender-based violence and denial of their education. The impact on attacks on education is even more damaging in situations where learning is not restored. And many children resort to or are forcibly recruited into armed groups and other activities. In 2020 alone, GCPEA identified more than 2,400 reported attacks on education and the military use of school and universities. This is 33% increase over 2019. This uptick occurred even as the COVID-19 pandemic forced the prolonged closure of education facilities around the world. This trend, which follows an already alarming figure of 11,000 reported attacks on education between 2015 and 2019, demonstrate that much of the work remains to be done to keep learners and educators safe in conflict-affected and insecure cities. Attacks continues in startling number in 2021. In Myanmar, for example, over 100 attacks on schools occurred in May alone, many involving explosive weapons. And in Colombia, attacks and the use of explosive weapons hindered access to school, including for indigenous children. The coalition recently released a report on the impact of explosive weapons on education and a case study of Afghanistan, which found that attacks on education involving explosive weapons gravely and univocally affected education in Afghanistan over the past 3.5 years, with more than 200 such attacks on Afghan students, teachers, schools, and universities identified between 2018 and mid-2021. All right, so, well, the picture is not totally green because, as mentioned by Joseph, in just 6 years, 112 countries, most recently the Maldives, Togo, Senegal, Mexico, and Algeria, have now joined the Safe School Declaration, thereby committing to protect education from attack. The declaration was a result of long negotiation process. The core group at that time consisted of Argentina, Austria, Cote d'Ivoire, Jordan, New Zealand, Nigeria, Norway, Spain, and the Philippines, and stood firm in ensuring a strong and important text. And so, on the 29th of May 2015, 37 states endorsed a strong declaration with tangible commitments to end military use of school and protect education from attack. 6 years later, that number has nearly tripled. By joining the Safe School Declaration, countries are committing to better protect education during conflict in these respects. 1, collecting data on attacks, assisting victims. 2, investigating and prosecuting attacks that violate the law. 3, developing conflict-sensitive approaches to education. 4, working to make sure education continues during war, including by seeking international help. And finally, in supporting UN efforts. And of course, and that's a specific one, in using the associated guidelines on protecting school and universities from military use during armed conflict. Sorry? So We're going to now just look at the Safe School Declaration implementation. Endorsement of the declaration is just one step. Concerted action to protect education from attack is particularly urgent now as COVID-19 further endangers student schooling. And let me share some good practice which we hear about at the Abuja conference. Since the declaration was open for endorsement, there have been tangible improvements in law and practice to protect education from attack, including in countries of peace, but also facing conflict. In fact, GCPEA found that the overall reported incidence of military use of school and universities actually declined between 2015 and 2020 in 13 countries that endorsed the Safe School Declaration in 2015 and 2016. And they experienced at least one reported incident of military use during the same period. Over a dozen countries have revised law and military guidance to reflect their commitment. For example, the United Kingdom has a dedicated policy on human security, integrating into military planning and operation the Safe School Declaration and guidelines. Other countries have also updated their military manuals, including Denmark, New Zealand, Ecuador, and Switzerland. Last year, the Central African Republic criminalized attacks on education and occupation of school in its protection code. Mali has also done a lot in terms of implementation. For example, they have established a national action plan and capacity building with community mobilization, which is now guiding implementation on the ground. And we look forward to the adoption of the draft bill on the protection of education from attack. And recently, the government of Ukraine in August 2021 launched an action plan for the implementation of the declaration, which amongst others create a monitoring mechanism for attack on education and institution and aims to ensure systematic approach to the protection of education in armed conflict. And Nigeria, as we heard, the Safe School Declaration framework has enabled the country to systematically develop strategies and mechanisms to protect education, and drawing from the Safe School Declaration and the guidelines, on September 6, 2021, Nigeria released its national policy for safety, security, and violence-free school as a response to the need of children and the violence that affect them around the world. In Palestine, to increase the protection of school from military use, the Ministry of Education developed an action plan to be implemented at the national level. At the African Union level, the declaration commitment have also been translated into building African Union peace and security decisions on attack on school. At the European Union, a new strategy on the right of the child was released in March, including commitment by the European Commission to promote the endorsement of the Safe School Declaration. Further, the African Committee of Experts on the Right and Welfare of the Child released a new general comment on children in situation of conflict, which prominently feature the use of attacks on education, including on female students, and make reference to the Safe School Declaration. I could go on, but I think we have a very useful website where a lot of those implementation processes are described. And I will just terminate with looking how at the global level, the United Nations Security Council has also taken greater action to bring an end to attack on education through a presidential statement issued in September 2020, paving the way for a dedicated resolution on the issue. So globally, states, civil society, and international organizations are meeting regularly on the declaration. And as we heard, the Abuja conference, just around the corner, will be the first one to be held in Africa and in a country, in a region that is acutely affected by attacks on education. As a lead up to the conference, the Safe School Declaration Implementation Network has begun and will be officially launched at the conference. The network is an initiative by Norway to support cooperation assistance, and peer-to-peer exchange of experience and good practices between endorsing states. I really very much hope that many of you will join the Safe School conference in Abuja. It's virtual, so you can register and join online. And we'll work with your government and your country on the endorsement or the implementation of this declaration. Thank you.
Veronique, a huge thanks for that incredibly powerful overview of both the extent and the scope of attacks and the challenge which they pose for education, for teachers and for learners, but also of the promising and positive developments that have occurred around the development, the endorsement and the implementation of the Safe Schools Declaration. It was absolutely fantastic. And I learned a lot in that process. And there's much to consider in respect of that. That you've shared today. Colleagues, I would say too that we'll hear shortly from some parliamentary colleagues about their efforts in improving implementation as well as encouraging endorsement, which is the focus of today's event. But I would just say that Veronique's remarks really do point to the opportunities for greater political recognition of both this challenge and commitment to addressing it. So fantastic to hear all of those things, and thank you. I see that many of you are introducing yourselves in the chat, which is fantastic, and that a number of colleagues have been introducing themselves from Nigeria, where of course the Safe Schools Conference will be held later this month. So it's fantastic to have that participation and make a contribution to building interest and momentum in advance of the conference. We're now, colleagues, going to hear from a young man who is affected directly by attacks on education. We're very grateful that Mohammed will join us. He's 17 years old, joining us from Hebron in the West Bank with the support of Save the Children and Defence for Children International Palestine. So for safeguarding reasons, I think Mohammed will have his camera off and we're not using his real name. But we're going to hear from him by virtue of a couple of questions which I'll pose to him, and we'll get his responses. He will, however, be speaking in Arabic. So again, if you have not already clicked the translation channel that you would prefer to hear the session in, please do so now. And I think we're going to now turn to Mohammed. Mohammed, salam alaikum.
مرحبا.
Mohammed, could I ask you to introduce yourself, to tell everyone a little bit about you?
أنا اسمي محمد، عمري 17 سنة، من فلسطين. بعيش في مدينة اسمها الخليل في الضفة الغربية. أعيش تحديداً في منطقة مغلقة ومسيطر عليها من قبل الاحتلال الإسرائيلي، وبحب أكون شخص بيساعد وبخدم مجتمعه ليصير أحسن. بمعنى آخر بفضل إني أكون شخص فعال بمجتمعي.
Great. Well, it's a real honor to have you join us today. Thank you. So can I ask the first question, which is, what makes you feel safe at school and on the way to and from school, Mohammed?
الأمور اللي بتخليني أشعر بأمان في المدرسة أو بالطريق إليها هو إنه في الصباح لما أروح على المدرسة ما أتعرض أو ألاقي مستوطنين في الطريق وأنا بمشي أو جيش الاحتلال بالطريق اللي أنا بمشي فيها. وبتعرض كتير للمضايقات والتفتيش في ساعة الصباح، فهذا الإشي اللي بخليني أفضل وبشعرني بالأمان إني ما أتعرض لهم.
And so you talked about that not happening. What about sort of what would make you, what are some of the things that happen at school that make you feel unsafe?
الأمور اللي بتخليني إني أشعر بانعدام الأمان في المدرسة أو بالطريق إليها هي الحاجز اللي بجانب بيتي اللي بمر منه عشان أروح على المدرسة، إنه يكون مغلق أو يكون عليه مشاكل بحيث ما بقدر أروح أو أوصل لمدرستي بهاي الحالة. وغير هيك التفتيش المستمر والاعتداءات المستمرة من قبل الاحتلال، جيش الاحتلال بالتحديد، والمستوطنين نفسهم علي وعلى الأطفال اللي بيكونوا رايحين على مدارسهم.
Okay, so Mohammed, given all of that, what would your message be then to the authorities, both the Israeli authorities and the Palestinian Authority, about what they can do to improve the situation for you and your fellow students in Hebron?
رسالتي للسلطات إنه لضمان حق أطفال فلسطين في الحصول على التعليم بأمان لازم يكون في اتفاقيات ومعاهدات قابلة للتنفيذ بحق التعليم في فلسطين، وضرورة وجود مراقبين دوليين في فلسطين أو على الأقل في المناطق المغلقة اللي فيها مدارس أطفال عشان نحقق للأطفال نسبة من الأمان ويروحوا على مدارسهم مرتاحين وغير مشوشين، لأنه المراقبين الدوليين كانوا بيحققوا في تلك الفترة نسبة أمان للأطفال بالفترة الماضية. بس هذه الفترة ما حدا بيشعرهم بالأمان غير أهلهم.
Okay, so thank you, Mohammed, very much for those reflections, for joining us today. Our thoughts are with you and we wish you well. And we very much appreciate the direct experience which you've been able to share with us and which we will bring into the conversation as we move forward. Thank you very much. So colleagues, I want to now turn in the remaining time to some presentations from parliamentary and other colleagues from countries that have either endorsed or haven't yet endorsed the Safe Schools Declaration, to hear about the work that they are doing and can do moving forward. And on a very positive note, I want to turn first to the Maldives, where the State Minister for Education, Fatima Nasir, is going to speak to us. As you might have heard from Veronique earlier, the Maldives has been one of the most recent countries to endorse the Safe Schools Declaration. And we know that occurred after a vote in the Maldives Parliament in favour of doing so. So there's a very direct relationship to parliamentary engagement, and in this instance, the endorsement of the declaration. So, State Minister, thank you for joining. Congratulations on becoming a state party to the Safe Schools Declaration. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Madam Watsamaya Popka, the host of the 4th International Conference on the Safe Schools Declaration, Madam Veronique Calvert, co-chair of the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack, distinguished representatives from civil society and parliamentarians, good afternoon. By the way, it's good afternoon for us. First of all, I would like to thank International Parliamentary Network for Education for inviting Ministry of Education Maldives for this important event. It's an honor and a privilege for me to represent Maldives in this important event. As we all would agree, educational facilities are the most important places in any country, and they need to be protected from actions that may impede children's access to education. Attacks on students, educators, and education institutions can have devastating impacts on access to education and education systems and on a society's overall development in the long term. Therefore, the safety of all schools should be a priority of all countries to ensure the continuation of education in emergencies. Schools and universities should be safe havens where students and educators can work towards a better future. When schools have to be locked down, there'll be a lot of disruption to students' learning, as we have experienced during COVID-19 pandemic. That's what we have experienced in Maldives. Our schools were closed for more than a year and students were taught online. It was not something we were prepared for. Hence, we had to prepare a lot of SOPs and guidelines for schools to continue teaching online with Google training for all the teachers in the country. I'm proud to say that we were among the few countries in the region to be able to continue teaching during the lockdown. And we were the first country to reopen schools safely. Those safety guidelines still are being followed in our schools. So parents and the community have confidence in our schools, and they know schools are the safest places. As our country consists of scattered islands and some of them very remote, providing data was a challenge when we started teaching online. Students who couldn't get access to data were taught through teleclasses. It's not only teaching learning that was affected. Since many houses were small with many people, online classes also was a problem, and staying within such confined areas led to many social problems. We all agree that every boy and girl has a right to education without fear of violence or attack. And every teacher and school administrator should be able to teach and research in conditions of safety. Every school should be protected for students to learn and fulfill their potential. Every university should be a safe place for students and academics and to foster critical thinking. The Safe Schools Declaration is a political commitment to better protect students, teachers, schools, and universities during armed conflict. The declaration was drafted through a consultative process led by Norway and Argentina and was opened for state endorsements at an international conference held in Oslo, Norway in May 2015. The Safe Schools Declaration outlines a set of commitments to strengthen the protection of education from attack and restrict use of schools and universities for military purposes. The declaration builds a community of nations committed to respecting the civilian nature of schools and developing and sharing examples of good practices for protecting schools and universities during armed conflict. Countries also commit to collect or facilitate the collection of data on attacks on education, investigate and prosecute war crimes involving education, and provide assistance to victims. By endorsing the declaration, all the states commit to restoring access to safe education and to developing education systems that are conflict sensitive and promote respect between social and ethnic groups. The Safe School Declaration is a framework for collaboration and exchange. Endorsing countries meet on a regular basis to review implementation of the declaration. Maldives started discussion of joining the declaration in March 2021. And President Ibrahim Mohamed Solih decided to seek the cabinet's advice to endorse the Safe School Declaration. After the cabinet advised for Maldives to join Safe School Declaration, President consulted the Maldivian Parliament on the matter. The Minister of Education was asked to send a proposal to the Parliament. And President also got the approval of Attorney General's Office, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Higher Education on this. The Parliament of Maldives approved the participation of Maldives in the Safe School Declaration, which is a political commitment to better protect students, teachers, schools, and universities during armed conflict. And it was endorsed by the Minister of Education on 26 August 2021. By joining the declaration, Maldives formally endorsed the guidelines for protecting schools and universities from military use during armed conflict, and commit to bring them into domestic policy and operational framework as far as possible and appropriate. Since Maldives joined this declaration quite recently, we are in the process of writing the guidelines in our local context, and discussions are being carried out now. I wish success to the participants of this webinar, and my wish is that outcomes of this gathering can contribute to strengthen the safe school movement and help us continue student learning in the face of any disaster or armed conflict. Thank you.
Thank you, State Minister Fatima Nasir for Education from the Maldives. That was a terrific overview of the way in which the Maldives endorsed the State Schools Declaration. And I must say it was incredibly impressive to hear you speak so expertly about what the declaration does and what you and your colleagues in the country are doing to implement it, and including via the development of guidelines which are specific to your context. I think there's a lot of inspiration in what you said today for many of us on the call, and we really pay tribute to your leadership on this issue, and thank you very much for participating today. So, colleagues, I want to now turn to a couple of parliamentary colleagues, members of the International Parliamentary Network for Education, who are working in their respective countries to support the implementation and/or endorsement of the Safe Schools Declaration. And to begin, I want to call on Manaz Akbir Aziz. Manaz is a member of the National Assembly of Pakistan. And like a lot of our colleagues who are members of the International Parliamentary Network for Education, she is incredibly committed to children's rights in general and to their right to education in particular. And on another issue, and that is the violence that children sometimes experience in school, one of her most recent wins is successfully passing some legislation in the National Assembly to ban corporal punishment in schools. So Manaz is active on a range of fronts, not least this one as well. So we look forward to hearing from Manaz now about her efforts in Pakistan and then across the region as well on protecting education from attack. Oh, Manaz, you're on mute. Sorry. Thank you.
So good afternoon and good evening. And it's great. It's an honor to be on this platform today. Very important it is in today's world. And thank you, Joseph. As the first parliamentarian to speak during today's event, I want to begin by saying something about the role of parliamentarians that they can play in our collective mission to strengthen the protection of education from attack. As parliamentarians in countries like Pakistan, which are yet to endorse the Safe Schools Declaration, we can encourage our governments to endorse the declaration by setting out the case for endorsement through a variety of means, including by writing to our ministries of education, defense, and foreign affairs, extremely important to include these ministries, including alongside colleagues from different parties to have a bipartisan situation here, support for the endorsement. Tabling a motion setting out our concerns about the impact of attack on education and the importance of endorsing the Safe Schools Declaration. Identifying gaps in legislation to protect education from attack and introducing legislation where a change in law is required. Having worked in civil society before entering the National Assembly and continuing to work closely with those colleagues, I know how important it is for civil society to partner with parliamentarians in this mission. And here I would like to also mention a very important part of civil society, which is media. Media in our countries is a very important stakeholder for bringing out huge concerns. So it is so critical in ensuring that we have access to the policy expertise and up-to-date information and evidence that is needed to achieve the most impactful change. In the National Assembly and across Asia, I'm leading a push for Pakistan and our neighbors to endorse and implement the Safe Schools Declaration. Here, I would like to mention an incident that happened in Pakistan in 2014, where in Peshawar, in Army public schools, an attack happened and 150 students, including teachers, were slaughtered. And it happened for quite a few hours and in the center of Peshawar. So it's still very hair-raising. And I think we can build on that. And considering the situation in Afghanistan today, it makes me revisit that kind of scenario, which we never ever want any school or any students to go through. Another such incidents happened when Etazaz, a young boy, saved his school from a suicide bomber who was outside, and he pushed him and died in that in that whole effort. So and also I would like to mention here that Veronique also had mentioned that child molestation, rape is very common. Violence against children is very common across Pakistan, and especially for the poorest of children who are studying in state-run schools. So that has to be included in our Safe School initiative for countries like Pakistan. And this is a regional issue. It's not an issue just pertinent to Pakistan. So Safe School Declaration is so important here. Why? Because I've seen firsthand the devastating impact that attacks on education have children on students, as I've mentioned, their communities, and in particular, the disappropriate effect on girls and women and other marginalized group. And it breaks my heart, and it breaks our hearts in Pakistan, what's happening with girls, and especially girls being pulled back from attending secondary schooling in Afghanistan. You will all have read the newspaper articles and have been inspired by Malala and her fearless peers who have stood up for the right to education in the face of such brutality. While attacks on education are not at the same level as 10 years ago in Pakistan, they continue to persist. And I think as we speak, the belt, our bordering belt that leads to Afghanistan, we are very worried about it. And it's not about our country, it's about what's happening in Afghanistan as well. And also here I would like to mention that not only talking about Afghanistan and Pakistan, but listening to Muhammad, the other countries, our heart breaks for those. And we have to, today as I'm listening to all of you, and I'm getting more and more committed to it. And in the end, I will tell you why I'm thinking that way. So the other countries that instantly come to the mind are Kashmir, Syria, Palestine, countries in Africa. So it's not just our country, it's a whole amalgamation of countries that are, and we need to, and this network is so central to be able to work with these countries and these situations. Between 2017 to 2019, GCPEA identified between 50 reported incidents of attacks on schools, with nearly half of these attacks targeting girls' schools. These attacks were largely carried out by non-state armed groups who have carried out killings, abductions, and indiscriminate attacks against schools and university students and staff. As we have heard today, endorsement alone of the Safe Schools Declaration is not a panacea, but it shows commitment, and it shows political will as well. Commitment to protect the right of every boy and girl to an education without fear of violence or attack. Commitment to every school and university being a safe space for students to learn and fulfill their potential. Commitment to safeguard education in front of the international community. We have seen great progress across Africa, so proud of the region, in endorsement and implementation of the declaration, with over 30 countries endorsing the declaration and great leadership by Nigeria and the African Union, which we've heard about today. Asia is lagging behind, and we really do need to focus on the region. The Abuja conference is an opportunity for our governments to now demonstrate that they are serious about safeguarding the right to education, which we hold them accountable for. And I'd like to mention that this network is so important, and especially giving an example of what's going on in Afghanistan. There is very little limited space between governments and countries and countries to discuss education. So this network is in a way apolitical, because it's safeguarding and it can be on the negotiating table, and we, the parliamentarians, can join and political leaders can join. With that, thank you very much.
Minaz, thank you very much. As always, massively impressed and inspired by your commitment and also the clarity of your vision for progress on these issues, your leadership in Pakistan, but also regionally. It's a delight to have you on this session, but also to have you as a member of the executive of the International Parliamentary Network for Education. So thank you. Look forward to continuing to work with you and securing Pakistan's endorsement of the Safe Schools Declaration in time. Shukriya. I'm going to call on our next speaker, who's also a member of the International Parliamentary Network for Education's Global Executive, Senator Deborah O'Neill from Australia. She's joining us at the wee hours in Australia. It's well and truly late evening there, and we thank her for that. Another one of our dedicated executive members. When she spoke, Veronique mentioned the Doha Declaration, and that declaration is a declaration of the International Parliamentary Union, the big global body that brings parliamentarians together around the world. And Senator O'Neill, in addition to being a senator in Australia, a member of the Senate's Foreign Affairs Committee, is also a member of the IPU's Committee on International Humanitarian Law, where the Safe Schools Declaration obviously has direct relevance. Alas, Australia has not endorsed the Safe Schools Declaration yet, and Senator O'Neill with her colleagues is pursuing exactly that, and we look forward to hearing from her now about that effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joseph. And I'll say good evening as it approaches midnight here in Australia to all of you. I hope that the days that lie ahead for you are filled with hope and optimism. But colleagues, we are here discussing a matter of great import for an entire generation of people across this world who are relying on our advocacy and our passion and our belief in the power of education to transform lives, to bring about the necessary change, to protect and provide access to education for all the young people across this planet. It's no small task. And we should remember that the delivery of public education was just an idea in the middle of the 1800s and was so excluded from so many people. So we can be inspired by those who've gone ahead of us. I want to indicate that I've recently become a member of the International the Committee to Promote Respect for International Humanitarian Law as part of the IPU. And I just want to be very clear about the law that indicates education is a right and that it's a crime against humanity to destroy schools and to prevent children from accessing education. And as a representative of that committee, I absolutely will be a tireless fighter along with my fellow travellers in that journey across the globe to fight and ensure that the rights of children and teachers to a safe learning environment is made available in all conflict zones. But I think we also can understand that it's not necessarily in just conflict zones. And my colleague from IPNEd, Minaz, has indicated that in a country where conflict is not alive, but an individual context can find itself caught up in the middle of an incredible attack on schools, that there's work for us to do, not just for other places where conflict is occurring, but work to do for our own countries where extraordinary acts of violence can be perpetrated in schools. To be clear, the committee's mandate for the IPU is to monitor the adherence to the Geneva Conventions for the Conduct of War. And Protocol 24 of that convention states that the parties to the conflict shall take necessary measures to ensure that children under 15 who are orphaned or separated from their families as a result of war are not left to their own resources, and that their maintenance, the exercise of their religion, and their education are facilitated in all circumstances. Their education shall, as far as possible, be entrusted to persons of a similar cultural tradition. And I note from looking at the participants here that many of you are actually on the front line attempting to deliver that promise to the young people of this time. It's often said that the first casualty of war is the truth, and I absolutely agree with that. But often it's education and the truth that is found in learning that is trampled by bitter war and strife. The whole world has seen what's happened in Afghanistan this year as the Taliban raced across the country, and a military campaign destroyed schools and school infrastructure and forced thousands of children out of schools, some of them never to return to school again, it would appear at this point of time. But we must be beacons of hope, and we can use our parliaments in the way that Manaz has indicated to raise awareness and to bring our parliaments to a richer understanding of what is at stake if we don't commit to education as a right for all young people across the globe. Everything becomes more and more unstable. In Australia, we have had a domestic debate about a program called the Safe Schools Program that is nothing like the Safe Schools Program that is operating internationally. I have to say that that is perhaps part of the reason why there's been a little bit of a step away from discussions around the Safe Schools Declaration, which was actually the focus of parliamentary debate in the Parliament in 2017. I expect in the coming weeks that there will be increasing effort to focus on this. Certainly I have written, and with colleagues across the political spectrum, we will encourage the Australian government to step up and take our place amongst the College of Nations in making sure that this basic right that we should all be able to ultimately take for granted becomes much more stable for all young across the globe. Thank you very much. Thank you for your work, and congratulations to Joseph and the team, Oliver, for pulling this event together. Thank you.
Senator O'Neill, thank you very much for joining us today, including doing so late in Australia. It's great to have you. I know that you're very committed to this issue, including as a former teacher, so you have direct experience of what this is like in the classroom and how your colleagues around the world are impacted. We will do everything we can to support you and others' efforts in Australia to encourage the government to endorse the Safe Schools Declaration. I know that one of the other things that sometimes governments have resisted or has been a barrier to their endorsement of the declaration has been a concern for the impact on their militaries when they're working overseas. But I know that this is less and less the case, with more and more countries, including where we're based in the United Kingdom, endorsing the Safe Schools Declaration, satisfied that it is compatible with the international existing and otherwise obligations of their militaries in performing activities overseas. So that's, I think, something too that we need to do better at communicating globally. Colleagues, we promised that this would be an hour, so we're almost coming to time. Unfortunately, our colleague from Nigeria couldn't join us, but we did hear from the government of Nigeria as they opened today's event. I do, however, before we finish, just want to turn to Veronique, who provided the opening keynote address, for any final remarks, including, of course, any advice or suggestions for colleagues that have joined and for others, including parliamentarians around the world who are committed to this issue. Veronique.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been very, very inspiring to hear from the different initiatives that are being taken forward. I really look forward to ongoing collaboration between the GCPEA and member organization and IPNEd and parliamentarians around the world. Again, how to thank you enough for sponsoring, bringing changes on this issue. It's very humbling to hear the measures and the action that you all have been taking. And I'm sure I haven't heard of everyone, and look forward to learn more and more. So just a reminder, there is the Abuja conference. I don't know if Yatasha someone could put the link in the chat box for anyone interested. to register and attend. And overall, very much looking forward to keep the collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Veronique. So IPNEd's mission is to build political leadership on and commitment to education. And one of the threats to education is attacks on education, attacks on teachers and students, and the military use of schools and other educational facilities. But this is very much part of our effort to build political commitment to the protection of education from those attacks, which are one of the threats to the right to education. So we're very committed to doing that and to working with you and others. Oliver has shared in the chat a link to our website where there's a briefing for what parliamentarians can do to encourage their governments to endorse and implement the Safe Schools Declaration. This presentation itself, today's webinar, will also be available on our website for others who haven't been able to join to watch. And we look forward to reporting on the Safe Schools Conference in Nigeria and ongoing efforts. Thanks to Veronique, to our parliamentary speakers, Manaz and Deborah, and the State Minister from the Maldives for sharing that terrific story. There's been lots of inspiration shared today, and I look forward to putting it to good use and seeing more and better protection of education from attack. Thank you all.